So we're going to talk about spoofing now. In the context of network security, spoofing is a situation in which one program successfully masquerades as another by falsifying data and therefore gaining an illegitimate advantage. Now the problem with this is that an attacker can send a packet to a machine over here pretending to be this computer. So I'll send it to you, you'll do something with it, and then send the response back to him. And this is kind of how the basic premise behind how distributed denial of service works. So you can kick off a conversation between these two computers without them even really meaning to talk to each other. So for example, I can pretend to be another person and send an email with another person's email address, trying to get them to open an attachment. So I can pretend to be the boss. I can send you an email, even though it's not from him. I can make it look like it's from him, and then you'll open it if the mail configurations and everything aren't set properly. So spoofing can be done with a packet. It can be done with an email. It can be done with many different things. So spoofing is a technique. It's not necessarily one specific thing. I send packets on a network using another computer's network address. We talked about that instead of my own. I use a VPN tunnel to present my IP address as 74.32.25.33, a US-based IP, versus my real Cambodian IP address of 204.21.33.56. Spoofing does not necessarily constitute an attack. Just because something is spoofed, it doesn't mean it's necessarily an attack. So whenever you conduct a penetration test, you will regularly use overseas IP addresses to attack the targets instead of your own. There's a lot of reasons for doing this. If you want to test, so for example, Netflix. If you're performing a network assessment for Netflix and you come from an overseas IP, the server should deny you access, even though you had the right username and password. It should say, hey, you're not ready for Netflix yet, country, whatever your name, wherever you're coming from. So Netflix doesn't support overseas streaming yet. So what you have to do if you're overseas and you want to watch Netflix, you can use something like private internet access, any kind of a VPN tunnel, and then connect from a US-based IP address, and then you can stream the Netflix overseas, no problem. So this is how that works. So spoofing in that sense, you're not attacking Netflix, you're just using what you pay for overseas, and they're none the wiser. So just because something is being just because spoofing is occurring doesn't mean it's necessarily an attack. So now we're going to discuss hijacking. Again, this is a generic term, and we're going to discuss how it relates to computer systems and ethical hacking. To take control, the definition is to take control of a system, a device, think Internet of Things, a toaster, a TV, whatever, that someone else is controlling. So just in case we didn't discuss that, IoT is Internet of Things, and what it is it's like smart devices that are connected to the internet. Think thermostats, televisions, refrigerators, microwaves, everything just about has some kind of a connection nowadays. Or if not, they will soon. Air conditioners, HVAC systems, everything. So it can be done to computers. So hijacking can be done to a computer, an application running on a computer, a drone, a TV, a thermostat, an account, a domain name can be hijacked, webmail account can be hijacked, and SaaS accounts can be hijacked, that kind of thing. Domain name service. So this is a complex topic. You can see we have several slides we're going to cover on this one. So domain name service is a very significant target for your network security assessments and penetration tests. We translate domainname.com to an IPv4 or IPv6 address. So there's two types of IP addresses. There's IPv4, which those have been exhausted earlier this year in 2015. I think it was in August officially. And then IPv6 addresses are now all the rage. So in the last few years, most of the IPv6 traffic we saw was some kind of rogue traffic. Nowadays, it's very common. So when you're sniffing, don't forget to sniff on the IPv6 adapter. Sometimes in Windows, when you're on a LAN, if you go and look on their machines that are doing the sniffing, the IPv6 is not even enabled. So you need to make sure it's enabled and make sure that you're sniffing IPv6 traffic as well. So inside the LAN, you're going to go through your egress point. When you go through your egress point, that's where the translation will occur for the IPv6. So it may be only on the LAN or on the WAN side and not so much your LAN side, but you still want to enable it because any traffic in here that's IPv6 may be all rogue traffic, which is still relevant even to today, the stuff I was talking about in the last few years that may be occurring here. So now most of this IPv6 traffic is legit out here, but not so in here. The IPv4 exhaustion just means they ran out of IP addresses. The permutation there only results in so many IPs, which there's a lot of them, but now the IPv6 should be inexhaustible. Typically interrogated early on in a security assessment when enumerating, it's usually one of the first things you do. Usually you're just given a domain name as your first part of the target, and that's all you're given. There's a large attack surface, and it's highly sought after, and also it's difficult to detect because it's usually handled by someone else and you're not in control of those logs, so you don't even know who's querying your DNS. The attack surface consists of a domain transfer, a zone transfer, zone poisoning, cache poisoning, reflection DOS, which stands for denial of service, denial of service itself, information leak, which is just leaking internal DNS info. So for example, a lot of people don't want to stand up a secondary DNS server inside of their organization, so they'll just use their external one, and they'll put like camera.somedomain.com, and they'll put the internal address 192.168.1.45. So now I know they're either using 192.168.1.45 or 192.168.1.0 for their internal network, or it could be 10.0.1.2 or whatever. So it could even be they have some crazy external name scheme that they're using internal. But anyway, the point here is that they've listed an internal IP address in their external DNS server. If we perform a zone transfer, we can kind of glean information about that. So it's a little less work and we get it for free. It's a little less work than once we breach the network. We don't have to go poking around in there to figure out what the IP address naming scheme is. So we talked about this. Again, all these red bits are test questions. Domain transfer, hijacking of a domain. So I can transfer that domain to myself. So now when you go in and do analyze your DNS, when you own the DNS, you go in and look at, like, say, GoDaddy, you'll see the little lock there. That means it's locked. That means you have to specifically say, yes, it's okay to transfer that domain. There was a time on the internet when I could just request a DNS transfer with the right information on an email request, and that domain would be transferred to me, and then I own it. And then I can change it to whatever I want, to my servers. So a zone transfer is a process of copying primary DNS server to a secondary DNS server. If a hacker is able to successfully do this, they may result in an information leak. DNS records often contain sensitive information. So to perform a zone transfer, this is what you would do. You would type nslookup, ls space -d, example.com. That semicolon is not supposed to be there. You could also do dig at ns1.example.com, axfr. Dig is another tool. nslookup is a command line tool. Dig is a command line tool. And you could also type host -t axfr example.com. It's supposed to be com, or I guess that's short for domain. ns1.example.domain. So you could transfer it there that way. Another technique is called zone poisoning. You breach the primary server and alter the zone file to corrupt the domain. So you take the zone information, which is how they're configured. We'll discuss this in a lab. We'll actually configure a DNS server, a DHCP server, and some other types of servers, so you can get some experience there. But you would breach the primary server and then alter the zone files to corrupt the domain so that it's handing out the wrong DNS, so it's pointing it to someone else's web server. So your web server's fine, but your DNS is messed up. So you may not know. That's why it's good to own your DNS and understand what it is. You want to periodically check it, and as part of your security assessments when you're out doing penetration tests, make sure that you're going out and looking at the DNS information and validating what it is. Print it out so that the owner or the person responsible for soliciting the test has this information in the future. If something goes wrong, they can query the DNS server and make sure it matches what you gave them when it was working fine. So zone poisoning, you breach your primary and alter the zone files. Cache poisoning, you send false answers to cache servers until they store them. So you just keep pumping false information at them until they store it. Now it's cached. Now for the next X amount of hours, whether it's 4 hours, an hour, it used to be they would store it for a week. Nowadays, most of them only store it for a matter of 4 hours, 3 hours. So for those 3 hours, the server would be sending out false things just as if you had poisoned the zone records. If the records are pointing to a server under your control, then this is a technique of what's called DNS farming. So you just keep poisoning the records for as long as you can get away with it until someone stops it. They will see it eventually. If they have a proper controls in place, they can arrest it pretty quickly. But in the meantime, you can farm all of their DNS through you. So if you poison the DNS cache, the DNS may come to you, you serve out the correct information pointing them back to the website. So I may not even know that I'm being farmed, but in the meantime, you have control over their DNS. So you can do all kinds of things with that. You can redirect it to a server that goes and proxies their website and put ads on their page and all kinds of things like that. So that's what DNS farming is all about. DNS farming is a test question. It occurs from cache poisoning. Those are the two things. You need to relate cache poisoning with DNS farming, not the other above.